Hey, welcome to Integrated Preparedness. I am Steve Smith. Now, I meant to start with a sip. That'll clear my throat and give me a little bit more time to let this roll, but I forgot. Uh, Today, I want to talk about probably the most serious threat that faces us because of something that came out last night, Zero Hedge. Their headline is DHS, Department of Homeland Security, braces for a potential EMP attack as the presidential election nears. Okay, now, a lot of people have been interested in EMP, CME, for years, and I've seen a number uh, of videos out there as people become more interested and, to an extent, a little more knowledgeable about this. I know that everybody is coming at this from a position of authenticity in that they want to pass on the information that they know, but in the realm of most people, their understanding of EMP is incomplete, and so I wanted to make a video about this. This is timely. Because I essentially, as they say, wrote a book about it. Actually, I wrote 4 books about it, and I'll be getting at that in a minute. But I want to read what we're getting in here first with the DHS report. This is from Zero Hedge. And I will say this, before I even get into this, this is the most critical, the most dangerous, the most serious threat that we face. And most people don't take it seriously enough because they don't know the chances of it happening. They don't understand the chances of it happening. They don't understand really what would happen in that case. They doubt a lot of it. And in just the next couple of minutes, I'm going to read a couple of things that will explain to you how serious this is. If you're not scared of this, you should be. It is frightening. You ought to be scared to death, and you ought to be taking steps to ensure the safety of you and your family during this and the survival. Because I'll get into that in just a second. First, I'll read just a couple of lines, a couple of short paragraphs from this. It says the U.S. Department of Homeland Security released a new report warning about a potential electromagnetic pulse EMP attack against the U.S. I'm skipping some of this because a lot of it is, I'll explain in a minute. DHS's warning, published Thursday, September 2, or about 60 days until the U.S. presidential election, indicates there are evolving threats against American homeland, most recently highlighting efforts to combat an electromagnetic pulse attack, which could disrupt the electrical grid and potentially damage electronics. The department released an EMP status report via the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency that said the key actions to address known EMP-related vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. That seemed like an incomplete sentence there. I think they cut some of that off. CISA said the EMP attack could disrupt, degrade, and damage technology embedded in critical infrastructure systems. Widespread blackouts could be seen if an EMP was to damage the nation's electrical grid, resulting in an additional flare-ups of socio-economic turmoil. EMP attacks are part of the emerging threats against our nation and demand a response, blah, blah, blah. Some of this is almost, it's limited information, which makes it essentially disinformation. Well, I'll explain in a minute. They said, we recently quoted Peter Vincent Pry. He's an expert on EMP, or accepted to be, ex-chief of staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, who wrote an op-ed that said the virus pandemic from China has exposed dangerous weaknesses in the U.S. planning and preparation for civil defense protection and recovery, and those weaknesses surely have been noticed by our potential enemies, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and international terrorists. Pry warned that China has been planning to defeat the USA with an EMP and cyber Pearl Harbor attack for a quarter century. Let's see if there's anything DHS or CISA gave any, nor neither one gave any more information on any other threats. No mention of whether the threat could be from a silver storm or EMP weapon. Okay, that's now that they're getting into some fluff here that really doesn't matter and can mislead, and that's where a lot of the problem comes in. Okay, when people think about EMP, like I say, there's an incomplete understanding of it, and I want to cover that today. This might go fairly long, and I might have to chop this off and make it into several, because I want to explain first about what it is, why you should be afraid of it, you should be terrified of it. I know that a lot of people out there says, I'm not trying to scare you, and not trying to put out doomer porn and all that. Well, I tell you what, I'm trying to scare you. You should be. If you don't have a complete understanding of EMP and CME, you need to, and then you will be scared to death. Okay, so I'm going to explain a little bit about what we know, what we don't know, what it is, what's going to happen, what you should do, and that might go a little bit long, and if I need to cut this into a couple, I will. First off, I should say, okay, so where do I come from? I've studied this for years. I wrote several books on it. I've written actually 4 books on it. The first is, and they're called the Stone Mount series. Many of you have read these. I love hearing from you all. Feel free to comment or ask questions as a result of these. The first was the reversion. There we go, reversion. That kind of sets the stage for what happened. The second is the revival. Okay, that goes into what, as we get through the first stages, and then what's going on. The third is the renewal, and the fourth that just came out is an appeal to heaven. Okay, now why do I get this? Am I just trying to sell books? Well, I wrote the books in order, and sure, I'd love to sell the books. I mean, that's why I write them. I'm not making any secret about that. And to be honest, the main reason that I started this channel was to talk about the books and explain more about this as people became more knowledgeable and interesting in it. Yes, I wrote the books because more and more people were asking me about the EMP CME scenario, and I saw some videos out there and some information out there that I felt was giving incomplete information. We'll pause this for just a second. Okay, I waited for a minute so that you wouldn't have to hear that police siren going by. And people ask me, why do you still live in the suburbs? And what's my trigger for leaving? This all comes into play with what we're talking about today, and I will address that. So I essentially, as I was answering people's questions about the potential EMP threat, that's what started me writing the first book, The Reversion. And in it, I attempted to explain, and I think I did a pretty good job, explained exactly what it was, what would happen, not just to individuals, but to the society as a whole, what it would take to survive it, and then what it would take to survive short term and then also long term, because that's important. Now let's kind of step back, because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. What is an EMP? What is a CME? Okay, everybody knows that EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse. Okay, now there are essentially two classes of this. The HEMP, which is it stands for high altitude EMP. That's a nuclear induced EMP. And what that is a line of sight, lights out, to all long line electrical systems and electronics. Now herein is where it gets a lot of argument, and I'm going to try to clarify this because it's important to understand. Now, this can be done either by popping a nuke a couple of 100 miles up above us, up above the center of the United States. And I always love it when I see these graphs, that are up there, damage of EMP, because it's always right above me. I mean, I live, in eastern Kansas on the Kansas-Missouri line, and no, I'm not giving away my OPSEC. I don't care. I don't think anybody's coming after me, and, well, I won't get into that. So, they always have it right above me, but that's exactly where it needs to go in order to take out the entire electrical system across the continental United States. And that's what it would be. Now, it wouldn't just be the United States. It would be Canada and Mexico and down into Central America. Because wherever it pops, it's line of sight. Now, they talk about taking out the electrical grid. There are 3 grids in the United States. There's the Eastern, the Western, and the Texas. Texas has its own, smart folks, okay? So essentially, you could either pop one 200 miles up, it would take out everything, or there's a better way to do it if you're a terrorist organization, and that is, you don't have to go that high in order to take out these grids. You can put a nuclear weapon on a Scud missile and put it on a freighter and sail it off of our shores, 10, 20, 100 miles out. They can pop that thing. They can set one off the East Coast. They can set one off the West Coast. They can set one in the Gulf of Mexico to pop one over Texas. And as they pop those will take out the grids. Lights out. Now, there are other ways that people have attempted to take down the grids. There have been some attacks, some physical attacks on power stations, on transformers, and there have been cyber attacks. Now, we won't go into that because there's a lot of misinformation out about that, but just realize that can happen. Now, the electrical grid, and this is important to understand, the electrical grid, don't worry, I'm getting to the exciting stuff here in a few minutes, but you need to understand this first. The electrical grid is essentially made up of about 2,000 major transformers across the United States. Now, these are split into those 3 different grids, East, West, and Texas. Now, I've heard varying reports on this. I have heard that there are a couple of spares kept around, and I've heard that there's not. Doesn't matter, because here's what the deal is. You take out a few of those transformers, or a good percentage on any of the grids, the entire grid is going to go down. They don't make replacement transformers here in the United States anymore. I think now they're made in South Korea and Germany. I think it's changed a couple of times. I heard once Brazil. I'm not sure if I believe that or not. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If a transformer goes down now, it takes up to a year to replace that transformer. Okay. If the grid goes down, there is no bringing it back. There's no fixing those things. If it takes a year during good times to replace a transformer, what do you think is going to happen when an entire grid element goes down? Okay, it's staying down. It's staying down for good, because nobody's going to come to our aid. South Korea, Germany, nobody's going to be building a bunch of transformers to ship over here when things have essentially been taken into a world war, and that's what it would be. And it would be a world war in which we were essentially disarmed except for our protected nuclear resources. Okay, a whole nother bag we're not going to get into, because that doesn't matter with the individual trying to survive. Okay, so when they go down, that's lights out. That is lights out for good. I've heard people say, well, you need to be able to survive for 3 months, or the government puts out, you need 2 weeks of emergency food. Okay, you're going to last about 2 weeks without food, so if you've got 2 weeks of emergency food and none's coming, you're going to starve to death in 4 weeks, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. Okay, that's all that means. We're getting back to that in a little bit. So, when those grids go down, it is lights out. Now, let me, before I continue this, go to the second type of kind of an EMP event, and that is a CME. That is a coronal mass ejection. This comes from electromagnetically charged plasma sent out by the sun. Matter of fact, whoa, excuse me, I hit you. I meant to read a part of my second book at this point, because it explains it. It explains it without me having to redo it. It's in the preface that I put in the revival to explain how serious this is. And let me get my glasses again. Here's the preface. It says, on September 1 and 2, 1859, a solar coronal mass ejection, CME, struck the Earth's magnetosphere, causing a geomagnetic storm witnessed around the globe. The northern aura was seen as far south as southern Mexico and the southern as far north as Australia. Gold miners awakened in the middle of the night to prepare breakfast, thinking it was daytime, and telegraph systems across America and Europe failed, shocking operators and setting papers on fire. Observed and documented by amateur British astronomer Richard Carrington, it was dubbed the Carrington Event. If a Carrington-class CME struck Earth today, it would destroy all electrical grids and electronic components worldwide. We would immediately be back in a world without electricity. A nuclear-induced electromagnetic pulse, or an EMP, would have the same effect in its target area. In either case, the EMP Commission estimates, and here's the important thing, that 90% of those in affected areas would be dead within 1 year from starvation, disease, accidents, and the violence that accompanies societal collapse. How probable is this? Now, here's the important part. In their 2012 report, the American Geophysical Union projected a 12% chance that a Carrington-class CME would strike the Earth within the next decade. The chance of a nuclear-induced EMP attack from one of our global enemies, we have no way to know. Okay, now let's back up on this a little bit. What are the chances of one of our enemies trying to take down our grids? The chances are great and increasing all the time. What is the chance of a CME? 12% in the next decade, they say. Now that is 12% each decade. They have gone back and, astronomers, cosmologists, whatever, have gone back and estimated that a Carrington-class CME has occurred in the past about every 150 years. The last one was 1859. We had a near miss here just a few years ago. So if it happens every 150 years, we're overdue, and we can pretty much assume that it's coming. When? Who knows? Okay. But the thing is that is the science assures us that is a certainty. Now, there are many things in preparedness that are not certainties for which everyone prepares. And yet too few people prepare with CME in mind. If you have CME in mind, you have EMP in mind. If you have CME and EMP covered, you have everything else covered. Okay, that's why I've always suggested prepare for an EMP, because if you're prepared for that, you're prepared for everything. Now, what should we expect as a result, an immediate result first, of an EMP or CME? First off, the all electronics, will all of them go down? That's arguable. They say there may be some, there may not be all. We don't know. Will vehicles run? We don't know. Okay, there have been, and people will argue this over and over again, and there have been tests, but those tests were not from a real EMP or CME. They were laboratory-induced tests, and those are limited by the limitations of the test. And out of those come this idea that a certain percentage of vehicles will run, okay, and a certain percentage won't. And the school of thought, and the thought that I go back into in my books, is pretty much most vehicles before 1977, when they became electronic dependent, most of those will run. Most of the others won't. However, even if some of them run, how long will they run? Well, they'll run as long as you have gasoline for them. Okay, and some of them, they say, may not run well. Okay, as soon as your gas tank is empty, you go to the gas station. First off, there's going to be lines and lines of people there that think they're going to get gas. Well, they're not getting gas out of the tanks underground because there's no electricity. Okay, how are you going to get that? Do you carry a 30-foot siphon hose, in your car for that very possibility? And if you do, are you going to fight everybody that comes up and sees your siphon hose and wants it for themselves? That is going to be a mess. So will vehicles run? Some will, some won't. But they'll run as long as you've got gas. Keep that in mind. Okay. in your planning. You might want to have as much gas as you can store safely at your location. You look at what's going to happen immediately. Okay, you ever been in an elevator with 5 or 6 people? I've been in elevators with 15 people. Elevators are going to stop. Those people in the elevators, just to kind of bring this home, those people in the elevators are going to spend their last few days in a cramped area with dying people, then dead people, and then decomposing people. The last person alive their last few hours are going to suck. Yeah, their last few days are going to suck. Think about that. These things will happen. Nobody's getting those people out of the elevators. Regardless of what you see in the movies about the hero climbing out the trap door on top, most of these elevators do not have trap doors. I've been told that. My oldest son happens to be an expert on elevators, believe it or not. And I've been told also by the representatives of the elevator companies, no, most of them do not have trap doors. And nobody's coming to get you out, because who usually comes to get you out is either building security or maintenance or the fire department. And guess what they're not going to be doing? They're not going to be concentrating on trying to get people out of elevators, even though in my book I do have one of the main characters going around getting people out of elevators. That was just to make a point that this is going to be a danger. You're going to have cities full of people working in the downtown area who all of a sudden, depending on what time of day it happens, if it happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be different. But if it happens during the daytime, you're going to have thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of people who are working in the downtown environment who don't live downtown. Okay, they're going to have to go down the stairwells. First off, they're going to go through this, the OODA loop of what the heck happened. What should I do? Arguing amongst each other. We should stay here. No, we should go. No, we should stay here. No, we should go. And as trickles of people start to spill out, and they won't realize that they need to go to the snack machine and get all the candy they can. They're going to start trying to move out and hoof it home. And in some cases, that's going to take several days. And people don't think that. But they say, well, I could walk home in several hours. Yeah, you'd be surprised. Have you done it? It takes longer to walk someplace than most people realize if they don't do it, on a regular basis. And besides that, you're going to be running into all sorts of interesting situations, of traffic jams, of people starting to get rowdy, of some of the predators out there, and there are plenty in a city. Some of the predators realize, hey, there's no cops around anymore, and look at all these people walking out the highway. Something bad has happened. They probably don't know what's happened, but they know that something bad has happened, and here's all these people trying to, walk down the highways with all their fancy watches and clothes and things like that, and let's go get some. And so you're going to have a big mess. Another reason not to work in the city. And then, and I realize this is going to go long, and this is probably going to end up being 2 or 3 or 4, because I'm going to talk about what's going to happen in the city itself. I'm going to talk about what's happened in the suburbs. I'll talk about what's going to happen in the country, and I have a different idea about these things than most people, because there are a lot of these ideas. As I wrote my books, as I went along, I really started to think, now, are the truisms that we have come to accept, meaning those things that people have come up with as their idea and then became repeated and repeated and repeated. And there's this idea, it's also the same with guns, that in order to sound like you know what you're talking about, you have to repeat what everybody else thinks is true, because the minute that you step outside of that, they go, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. From people who haven't thought it through themselves. Well, as I started thinking these things through, and really, and I know the city and I know the suburbs, I have a different idea of what would happen than what most people think, so I'll get into that maybe in the next one. We'll see. But what's going to happen in the first couple of days. Okay. People will try to get home. Most of them probably will get home. Some of them won't get home. Some of them will be killed on the way. Some of them will be maimed and injured to where they'll die, trying to get home from there. And then people will be looking for water. That's the first thing they're going to be looking for. Okay. They're not hungry yet, but I'll tell you, in a situation like that, everybody, we live in a culture, right, where everybody carries a water bottle around, right? Well, as soon, and this stuff can make you thirsty. Surviving makes you thirsty. Getting out of town makes you thirsty. Going down, 40 flights of stairs and getting out into mayhem. All of a sudden, do you have a bottle of water? Well, that's kind of, neither here nor there. But in the first day or so, people are going to be, looking for water. Now, a lot of people, hopefully, you'll have it stored up, and you should have a whole lot. And I'm going to cover that. I think I'm going to make a separate one about what you should do to prepare. But within a couple of days, people are going to start getting sick from drinking bad water. After the water towers dry up because they're filled with pumps and the electricity's out, and there's no more pressure to take the water out, now people are looking for water. Okay. You drink bad water, you're giving yourself problems. Within a couple of days of no police presence, the cities are going to just collapse. They are going to become hells that the average person can't imagine. But, and I'll give you a preview of what I'm going to say later, I do not believe that the so-called golden hordes in the city are going to come out en masse into the suburbs. I'll save that for an explanation in the next one, I think. Okay. After about a week and everybody comes home, and they finally get home or wherever they are, within a week they're out of food, because the average person does not have more than a few days of food at home, and maybe a week, and that's, like I say, and that's if they're squirting out all the ketchup packets that they forgot to bring in from the car. And once they're down with that food, now they're looking for food. You're going to have big problems at grocery stores, at convenience stores, at CVS and Walgreens, and any place that sells a can of soup or a bag of beef jerky is going to have people going in there trying to get it. And whenever you've got a whole lot of people going in there trying to get the same thing, you've got a recipe for big problems. And some people are going to get hurt and killed in those situations. Now, they run out of food, now what? Now this gets to my trigger. People have said, at what point do you bug out? Okay. This is my trigger. Okay. I live in the suburbs. I live in a nice suburb. I like where I live. I have many reasons that I live here. We live here, because Kelly and I discuss this amongst ourselves. We live here for a multitude of reasons, and it's about quality of life. And I do not really, and I'll probably get into this in the next one, I do not really worry about being able to protect my location. And that doesn't just mean my house. To protect my location for people who want to try to come take my stuff. I'm fairly secure that I'll be able to protect it just fine. That's not why I would leave. Here's why I would leave. And I'd leave right away. Because after a week or so, you live in suburbia, you're going to be in a cul-de-sac. People are going to be out talking in the cul-de-sac. Oh my gosh, what's happened? And some people, in my case, some people are going to know. They know about me. They know that I am a prepared person. They know that I know about these things. And they're going to be asking me questions. What should we do? What should we do? Or you're going to keep an eye on these neighbors. And over a few days, you're going to see that they're running out of food. Okay. And that's going to bring a big question to you. And then a neighbor comes over and they say, you know, Mary and I, we're not eating anything but the kids. We've run out and the kids need something. How are you going to say no? How are you going to say no to that? And yet, I don't have enough food to feed everybody for as long as it's going to take. Because I tell you what, in an EMP or a CME, it's not coming back. The government is not coming in with trucks of food. You're not going to have to worry about a FEMA camp. Okay? There's not going to be any. The food you have is the food you have to live on until you start producing your own, which gets into probably the next one on what you should be doing and how you can do it. And when it runs out, it runs out. And it's not like, okay, all the food's run out, throw some seeds out there and let's get this started. No, that's not it. So if I give every bit of food that I would give away to neighbors is food that I'm taking out of my kids' mouths. And I'll tell you what ought to get people really on the page here. A friend of mine asked me just last night, what got you really interested in going on this? And it might have been the first time that I ever said this. I told him first, I said, well, I've always been, preparedness minded. I always loved survival stories when I was a kid. From the Swiss Family Robinson, I read that over and over and over again to others that I can't remember. All through Boy Scouts, be prepared. Through the years that we would go down to my family's farms, and when I had horses, and I always loved the woods, and they lived, back then, and my family's place was fairly remote. They were pretty darn self-sufficient, and I saw that as a good lifestyle. And we grew up in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, and the duck and cover. We always practiced for the nuclear attack that was coming. After Khrushchev banged his shoe on the table. If you're not old enough to remember that, look it up. And so we all of our family across the country, we had this plan. We were going to meet at the farms, and we knew that's where we would be surviving from then on. So this was not new to me. But when my buddy asked me last night exactly what got you focused so much on preparing the way you do, I told him this. When I saw what would really happen, I'd heard about, when I first started hearing people talk about EMP, I thought, well, those people are nuts. Okay. And then when I looked into it myself and I studied it, and I studied the EMP Commission report, and I thought about it, and I realized what would really happen. That was frightening. And I pictured in my mind, the faces of my children starving to death, and having to look at their faces, to look in their sweet faces, these people that I love so much, who God had entrusted me with their welfare, who looked at me and trusted me for their safety and their lives. And I forced myself to make it real, to look in their faces and say, there's no more food. And then I took it farther, and I suggest you do as well. I suggest that you, in your mind, as real as you can make it, watch the people you love starve to death. And if that doesn't change your mind to getting ready and put everything you can into preparing for that eventuality, then nothing else I say could help. I think I'm going to stop it here because that seemed like a good stopping point, because there's so much else to say. and I'm going to come back. I have to do other things today, and we're going to talk about what you should do. Is it possible to live? So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't complete my earlier thought. So, because I don't want to watch my children starve, and I don't want to watch my neighbors starve and their children starve, that would be my trigger. I feel pretty certain I could defend my location, but I could not stand to watch people around me starve, and I could not stand risking my children's survival to give away what I have. Does that make sense? For that reason, as soon as I knew that an EMP or a CME had occurred, which wouldn't take long, and this is important. If you're first out of the gate, that's the important thing. As soon as I realized that was what had happened, we would be gone within a matter of hours, and we would be going to our next location. So that's my trigger. That's what I suggest you have a trigger if you don't already live out there in the country, And most of us don't. Most of us live here because we like it, but you have to have a plan. So, like I said, I'm gonna close it there. It is a real danger. It is a real possibility, and it could happen at any time. It could happen before you're done watching this. It could happen next week. It could happen next month. It could happen a year from now, but it is going to happen. And if you're not prepped up for that, you need to start working at it really hard, because if you haven't looked at this really deeply, you should, and you should be scared to death. So I'll leave it at that. I'll get ready to make that next one here, maybe later tonight or tomorrow morning. And until then, you all start thinking about it and start getting prepped up. Redouble your preparations. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.